everybody, I'm John Reffett. Welcome back to the shop. We'll call this part 3. This is getting a little long, but in this one we'll get our show you how to mix up the epoxy and get your guides epoxied, and if I can squeeze it in, hopefully a little bit of the marbling that we'll do down towards the handle. So let's get into it. Okay, so what you want to do when you first start mixing this stuff, this is the resin, so be sure to use the blue syringe for the blue bottle. Draw out, I like to draw out about 2.5 to about 3 milliliters of this stuff. This is not a big one, so I'm going to do about 2.5 here. Squirt it into the cup. And the same deal for the hardener. And this needs to be precise. You need to be right on your 2.5. It's not kind of like the epoxy for the handle. This stuff has to be about perfect, or it will not harden right. Excuse me. So at this point you could take your mixing stick and just stir it. Now if you do it this way, don't whip it, because you can see there's some bubbles in there now. These will come out, but the more you whip, the more you will get more bubbles, and it can mess up your whole epoxy job. But like I said, I've got that little electric mixer. You need to stir this stuff minimum 3 minutes. I'll let it go on to 4, sometimes even 5. And then once we get it mixed, we'll put it in this tray here. It's an aluminum foil dish, and what that does, it'll spread out and helps control the heat of it as it starts to set up, and it'll get the bubbles out of it. So we'll get this mixed up, come right back. Okay, so we've got our epoxy mixed up. You can see here it's not quite all the way bubble free, but there's just a few little teeny ones in it. So you want to pour that into your tray. This was that's just the mixer goes into comes with a mixer, electric mixer. Stir things up for you. It'll just sit there and spin. So you can pour it out into your tray. You see it'll spread out, and then the bubbles will start to pop. And one thing too, you want to keep wherever you're doing this at. This is just a temperature gauge that I got. You can see ideal is between 70 and 80. The temperature of your room. I got a little bit warm, so but keep it at those temperatures, and everything will cure up well like it's supposed to. And you can see the rod turning. That is a rod dryer, which is, I can get it in the camera here. This here, the rod blank just fits into that. Turn it on and it spins. That way, as you apply your epoxy, it self-levels, so when it spins, it will level out and make you a nice smooth finish. If you're wondering how clear this stuff is, that's pretty good stuff. It's really clear. That was just some that had dried in another dish. So whatever you put on there, it's going to show through. So let's go ahead and get started here. A lot of times I'll just do one coat. You can do 2, you can do it in 1. I like to do 2, and it tends to get some of the air out of it. So, on the first one, get a good bit on your brush. Get this going the other direction here. And kind of start where the thread runs up onto the guide foot, because there is like a little tunnel in there, and this will help shove the air out of that tunnel. You just put it on just with some steady pressure, and it will start to soak down through the thread. Once you get your brush full, it's a little bit easier. You can see it tends to darken the thread about a shade. So kind of keep that in mind when you're choosing some of your colors. And some of the lighter colors tend to show through. Chartreuse on black a lot of times will. So you basically just want to put a thin coat all over everything. It's a little tedious, but does really look nice after it's all finished. Now, since this was a double foot one, we can go ahead and start on the other side. And be sure, you can see that little black speck right there. That would definitely show up. So be sure to get any dust or anything that might have got on it off, because it will definitely show through. So just keep applying all the way around. Now I'm probably going to do this in 2 coats. So looks like there's a little bit of something else on there. And just as it penetrates really good, you can keep epoxying right up the guide foot. Now on the outside of each edge, you know, about a 1/16, this will seal it up and try to keep it'll keep water from getting up under the threads. You could use a piece of tape, I suppose. I generally just freehand it. And if you do get off just a little bit, like this blank, you're not going to be able to see it too well, but sometimes the black blanks, it will level out some on its own. This takes a little practice. I've got a little bit off right there. But as that dries, you'll not even see that. A little something else in there. Kind of keep some toothpicks handy. Likes that little black speck for some reason. I don't know where that's coming from. Kind of dip it out as long as when it's still wet. As you see, that's starting to really soak in good here. So we'll just move it up a little bit more. Try to shove some more of that air out. You don't want to get it really thick because it will run out. It's going to come out from underneath here. You can see it start to a little bit on each side. You want a little bit there. You want to seal that off. So if you're out fishing when it's raining, you definitely don't want any water up under there because it will rust the guides. It takes a long time, but it'll cause them to fail eventually. To kind of really, I just kind of paint it on, I suppose you could say, because like I say, it will self-level. So if it looks like it's humped up to you some, it will move around. It'll level out. Bring this one all the way out to the edge. So when we get to this point now, this center part here in between the 2 wraps, you can epoxy that straight through. I do that a lot. Or, you know, as we did here, about a 1/16 out, you can do the same thing on the inside edges of these if you choose to. But now that we got this coated all the way through, I'm gonna kind of let that sit and let everything soak through, and make sure we've got plenty coming up under the guide foot there to seal everything. Okay, so we just about got them all finished here. Just putting the last little touch here on the last single foot guide. You can see it's already starting to come through there a little bit, so that's what we want. So now on your tip top guide wrap, if you choose to do that, I'll start about here. You see the brush about halfway on the thread, about halfway on the tip top. Sometimes you can get a little gap in there, and that epoxy will run up into that, that guide foot just a little bit. So I'll start there and then work my way back down the blank. Doesn't take a whole lot when you get to this point. Again, you're just kind of just working that epoxy around. Get to the edge here, and then we'll do about a 1/16 out or so from the end of the thread. Kind of looks like that one did not kind of suck into the end of that, so that's good. But you kind of build a little ramp, you know, right here, and it doesn't matter how far you go up, just however you want to do it. But just so you seal that thread to that tip top. And really, that's about all it takes for that. Kind of watch it, make sure it doesn't football out on you, so to speak. And sometimes it'll get a little bulb on it. You can kind of smooth it out as you need to. But as you can see here, if you look right up under where the guide foot touches the blank, see that little bit of epoxy is coming in there? That's what you want. That way you know that you've got a good seal right there. So what you can do at that point, take a little bit more and then come up out on this edge and do the same thing you did here, say about a 1/16 of an inch out. Just be careful not to get it on the guide. And then around a couple times, and it will run, it will move right where you can't hardly get your brush between the guide and the blank right there. It will move as it sets. Just don't get a whole heck of a lot in there, because it can really come out and ball up there between the end of the guide and the blank. And there you have it. So that's how easy it is, the epoxy. Just take your time, you know, and start at the end of the guide foot, work your way out to work that air out from under that tunnel, and be sure to cap off each end of it, seal it up good, and you've got it. So we'll get the camera moved back around and then do one more thing on this, and we'll have this one done. Okay, so we're ready to start our marbling. A few things here. We'll need a couple of mixing tins. You can just use aluminum, or you can even use the mixing cup that you would mix your two-part epoxy in. And what I use for this is High Build Pro Coat. It's a lot thicker, and it does not tend to run on you or your collars will move. I'll show you what I mean when we get started doing that. You know, it's basically the same thing as your regular Pro Coat that we use to do the guide wraps with, but it's just a lot thicker. I think a lot of guys might use something like this on saltwater rods. So you'll have that, and then also there's different pigments. This is like a liquid pigment that you can color the epoxy in. And that's all we're going to do is color the epoxy and then apply it to the rod. So that's kind of yellow, but that, I mean, you've got, yellow, white, red, blue, black, and you can mix these to make whatever color that you're wanting on your rod. And also there is a powder. I'm not sure if you can see that very well, but it is kind of glittery looking, and it really makes a nice looking finish. For this one, we're going to use red, silver, and black, and I'm going to add some white to the silver and the red to lighten it. So it kind of will, the red will be, oh, looks a little like that, and the silver will be sort of like this. So keep these couple extra. I did a little sample there just to see what it looked like. Keep these so I can match those colors. A little tip you might need. You know, some mixing sticks here and some toothpicks, and I'll show you what the toothpicks will be for. That's what we'll move our epoxy around. And also your syringes to draw out your epoxy. Same as we did before. We'll do about 3 milliliters and mix it for a minimum of 3 minutes. And then we can start adding our color. So I'll go ahead and draw out the epoxy, get it mixed up, come back and we'll mix up the colors. Okay, so we've got it mixed. You can see we got quite a bit of bubbles in here. They will come out as we pour them into these trays, so don't worry about that. So we're going to need a, I don't know, 50-cent quarter size glob of this stuff in each one of these trays, because one will be our silver, one will be our red, and then I'll leave some in the mixing cup and mix the black into it for the background. As you can see how thick that stuff really is. And if you run out, you can always mix more, but here's what we're going for. Might be a little tough to see in this light. But that's what it'll look like once we're done. So when you mix this, let's start with our black first. It does not take a lot of this. So this is just a little spatula, and I'll just get a little bit out. As you can see, it's not a lot. Just drop it down in there. Take one of your mixing sticks, and don't whip as you mix. Just kind of mix slowly. You don't put any more bubbles in than needed. And you can see it'll start to darken. That it looks like we're going to need just a little more, but you know, you can always add more, but you can't take it out, so don't get too awfully carried away with it. Let's add just a little bit more. I really want that dark for the background. That should be enough to do it. Everything mixed up really good. You don't want any chunks left in it. So as you can see how thick that stuff really is, and it's a little cool in here, so it'll get a little tougher on you, a little stiffer. All right, so that's for our background. So now let's do the red. Like I said, we don't want it as dark as this would normally come out. So I'm not going to use a whole lot. Just a little bit more. And I'm going to add a little white to it to lighten that up some. And we'll mix that and see where that brings us to. We're trying to match that, so. And as I do this, as I put it on, I've got a little space heater over here that I'll run and keep some heat against it so it doesn't thicken up a whole lot. And you see it kind of lightened it up a little bit there. Let's see. And what I'll keep this other for, take a little dab, and I'll just dab it on top of it. And kind of try to match the color that way. I know it's a little hard to see in the camera, but I believe we've about got that. And then we'll do our silver. Add a little white to it, lighten it up some. Doesn't take long to mix this stuff up. white. We'll mix that, see where that gets us. As you can see, a lot of those bubbles had already came out of the black and the white. Put this over here where it's starting to warm up some. And just mix it thoroughly. Try to get all the chunks broke up. You can use anything you want to mix this stuff up. There's a piece of something in that. Definitely don't want that in there. It don't necessarily have to be these little tins. These little tins, you know, as you pour it in there, it will spread out, and a lot of those bubbles will. Okay. So, one thing about the rod blank, you know, as you put your handle on your guides and all that, you're going to handle this thing and get grease all over your finger grease on everything. So take a little bit of alcohol, paper towel, and just wipe it down real good so you can get all that grease off of it, because it will, sometimes you'll put this stuff on and it'll be just like a frog eye in it, and that's usually you know, finger grease. So the first thing we got to do on this one is put our black background on. So you don't want a whole lot. You want just like a skim coat on there, because it can, if you get too much, your colors can start to blend together. So we got this in a rod dryer, and we'll just drag it around there, just kind of like we did the guide wraps. And don't get a whole lot of it right next to the handle, because a lot of times you'll want to wrap, you'll do a thread wrap right here, and you don't want a hump or a valley, because it can have been there, done that, and can mess up your thread work, make it a little harder. It's not looking like it's covering everything, but it will once we get it finished. Like I said, just a thin coat, and just keep dragging it on around. And if you happen to run out, you didn't mix enough, well, you can just mix up some more and keep right on going. So I'll get this finished up to my mark. You can do this as far up the rod as you want to. I generally don't go past the first guide. You get a lot of bend in the rod, you catch a bigger fish or something, and it could cause it to crack over time. So like this piece of tape here is just about as far as I'm going to go. So I'll get this first coat on, then we'll come right back. Okay, got our first coat on. Came up about as far as we need to. Now you don't have to use a black background or a red, whatever you choose. You can just go through with a light skim coat of just the clear epoxy. However you choose to do it. This is, you know, custom rod building, you make it how you want to make it. So make sure we can see good here. So next I'm going to take our silver. Now, like I said, you can make a design in this thing. You could write your name if you choose to, or as it gets really goopy, you can take it and just kind of let it drizzle over there and make its own design. So it's just, your imagination is the only limit. So what we're going to do here, I'm just going to take some of this and just kind of just add it to it, just in random spots. And the black will kind of make this stand out a little more. So you can just really get crazy with this if you want to. So we got a little bit here. Now on the rod dryer I have a clutch, so I can just stop this anytime I want to. that's a handy item to get if you choose to do this. Get the rod dryer clutch. It'll make it a lot easier when you get into tight places on some of the guides. Now I just take a toothpick and I'll stop the rod and just kind of just start moving this stuff around. I kind of like to make it look like it's almost like a splotch. But like I said, any way you choose to do this, and you just kind of move it around, and it's pretty much going to stay there. Whatever design you put in it, it's going to stay with the high build. And before we quit, I'll show you one that I've done with the regular medium build epoxy. You can take a paper towel every now and then, you can just wipe it off so you don't get kind of goopy. And it really makes a nice effect. So let's throw a little red in there to boot. Flip this a little more, get some heat going so it doesn't set up. Kind of cold in West Virginia, so. And I drop my stick down in it. But we'll get a little bit on here, maybe a little too much here. Let me get another stick. And we'll just add a little red into it a few places. Kind of put it on top of the silver, you know, beside it, just random. And there's a lot of videos. Some of these guys are artists with this stuff, and I've seen them make it look like it's on fire. So, you know, whatever you choose to do with this. I kind of like it to mix together a little bit. So we'll take a toothpick, and then we'll move it around. Really no rhyme or reason to the way I do it here. I just move it all around. And you can use it. You don't have to use a toothpick for this. Anything, even a thread pick will work. But you can kind of see what we're going for here. Stuff getting a little messy. Red's getting a little thick. Like I said, you see all the bubbles that was in it to begin with, they did come out. You can also, if you see one, you can pop it with your toothpick. And as it dries, it'll settle out too. So you can see the effect we're going for here. I'm going to continue on with what I'm doing here, and we'll get this all, get the silver and the red added to it and get it all moved around, and we'll come back. Okay, so we're just about got it finished here. Just check everything over and make sure. It's going to need another little spot of red here. You've got everything like you want it. And just like with the thread wraps, you need to let this stuff sit for a minimum of about 3 hours. And then you can move on with the next part. So you kind of see it's like I said, your imagination is the limit. However you choose to do this stuff, whatever color you choose, you can mix the colors to make other colors, make get into some greens and purples and just whatever. The next thing, I guess our next step, we'll do some thread work down here, put the hook keeper on. Got a decal to go up here and wrap the ends of these, and then put our final coat of epoxy on. This will be a done deal.